undermine its efforts to isolate Iran and defeat ISIL in the Middle East?
The strategy is flawed from the GCC states. Flawed because, in one sense, they don't want to talk to Iran. Iran has asked for a dialogue, and they don't want to sit on the table and talk to Iran and sort out all the issues that we have with Iran. On the other hand, they are, instead of uniting and unifying the Gulf region to stand as a bloc, a solid bloc, they are actually dividing it into different countries. They are disintegrating the regional organization, the GCC. There are conflicts between the GCC member states, the blockade against Qatar. So you can't have one group standing against Iran if you want to push back in one sense. And this group is disunited and disfragmented.
At the end of the meetings, the GCC and the Arab League expressed support for Saudi Arabia against what they described as Iran's destabilizing activities in the region. A diplomatic boost for Saudi Arabia, but also a prelude to more tension in the region. Hashim Ahbara, Al Jazeera.
So let's meet the panel for today. Two of our guests are here in Doha. With me in the studio is Majid Al-Ansari, who is a professor of political science at Qatar University. We have also got Abdallah Al-Shayji, a professor of political science from Kuwait University. And in Tehran, Hassan Ahmadi, an assistant professor of political science at the University of Tehran. Welcome to all of you, three professors on the show. So let's get into it. Majid, let me start with you. I mentioned this in my setup a little bit earlier, the emergency, and I am using air quotes there because there seems to be this premise of we need 3 summits right now to deal with this emergency. Is it an emergency, or is this in fact a way of almost creating the feeling of an emergency?
Yeah, first of all, let's just clarify one thing, which is that 2 of the summits were emergency summits.
Okay.
The Islamic summit is a normal summit. It's just a procedural issue. Yeah.
Okay.
But certainly, the 3 summits are held consecutively in a show of emergency, if you will, because it was very clear for the Saudis that they needed to prompt up the situation between the United States and Iran and provide some lip service for the American agenda in the region. Of course, what the Saudis were not banking on, or the Emiratis, is that the White House would change its position so quickly, because the White House went from calling for war with Iran to basically now the ExxonMobil staff going back to work on Sunday in Iraq. So there's absolutely no sign of any tension now, a real tension between the 2 countries.
Is there still not a bit of ambiguity, though? I mean, the classic from the Trump administration of mixed messages. Bolton says one thing, Trump says the other thing, and we never quite know what the official line is.
Yeah, I think, if we look at the pattern of behavior when it comes to the Trump administration, it's very clear that this issue now has been treated exactly like the North Korean deal. So you can see it very clearly, start with escalation, threatening, talking about even, I think what Trump said in the UN was, I think, obliterating all of North Korea.
Total destruction of North Korea.
Total destruction of North Korea. Now, the same thing has been said about Iran, but also as what happened with North Korea, then he started praising the leader of North Korea and then asking for the summit and then holding the summit and then not really caring what happens after the summit, to be honest, because it's all a political win for Trump. The same thing is what the White House now wants from Iran. It's very clear that the Iranians are more stubborn. They're not going to get into bed easily with the Americans just over a photo shoot. And right now, the Saudis and the Emiratis are left high and dry without any real agenda in the region towards what's going to happen. It's very clear that when it comes to the military, the U.S. is not prepping up for war. When it comes to how it's dealing with its citizens and its companies in the region, it's not prepping up for war. But the Saudis and the Emiratis now are left with a summit that is basically only condemnation of the acts that took place during the last month, but with really no procedure to deal with it in the future.
Even so, let's talk about that condemnation. And Abdallah Al-Shayji, I'll bring you in at this point. Tell me what your thoughts were on the language, particularly of King Salman, the way he said, we will use all means to stop Iran, Iran's criminal acts, naked aggression against our stability. It was all quite aggressive language, really.
Exactly. I mean, we have to look at this issue or the summits, the 2 emergency summits that were held last night and until dawn, as a part of the ongoing Cold War mentality and practice. that has been the norm, the new norm, since 2016 at least, when Saudi Arabia severed ties with Iran, and other GCC countries followed suit, especially Bahrain and also other GCC, even Qatar and Kuwait withdrew their ambassadors and lowered their diplomatic representation in Tehran. So what's going on is that this is another salvo of pushing back by the Saudis, the leader of the GCC, to send a message to the Iranians, especially after the last spat of bombings, of the threatening, as King Salman stated very clearly at the opening statement, that Iran is responsible for the shenanigans and for what's taking place to undermine security and stability in the region. The heightened tension is because of the escalation of rhetoric between the United States and Iran. And now we have de-escalation. And from day one, I said there is no war in this region, but it's just part of the Trump administration flexing its muscles to gain some credence and some votes among his staunch voters and his base, to rally his base, as the Americans keep saying. So the condemnation was expected. The Saudis are trying, along with the Emiratis and the Bahrainis, to try to, who are the three hawks. We have hawks and doves in the GCC, and the hawks are now taking the stage, and they're trying to send a message to the Iranians, to their constituencies, and to the Americans that we are standing tough against the Iranians. And there was wide condemnation, although it was not reflected in the speeches on the other summit, emergency summit, the Arab League summit, but it was clearly in the final communique that there is a strong condemnation of Iranian behaviors. Iran has brought this upon itself for supporting proxies, for fomenting sectarianism, and for pushing the region into the abyss. So it's clearly the message was clear, sent by the communique, the Arab final communique, the Arab Summit final communique, and before it, the GCC final communique also.
So is this, Abdullah, the Saudis, as you describe all that condemnation, is this the Saudis almost taking the baton from the United States? As Majid said, the United States slightly backing down a little bit. Is this the Saudis taking the baton and saying, right, we will now lead the charge against Iran, and US, if you want to support us, come along?
That case, because the perplexing issue that there were no beyond condemnation of Iranian behavior, which was and practice, which was expected, was the issue of what are the practical measures that will be taken by the GCC leaders and by the Arab leaders to put in practice this condemnation, translated from condemnation to a practical approach to try to push Iran to change its behavior. I mean, this is the issue. No regime change. And then there is contradiction by the United States. And this is what's really puzzling. Pompeo, about a year ago, stipulated the 12 conditions on the Iranians that they should really adhere to in order for the Americans and the Iranians to strike a deal. In Tokyo, President Trump, a few days ago, just obliterated all of that and erased it, and he just stated one point, and that is Iran should not become a nuclear power. And the Ayatollah Khamenei stated clearly that there is the Iranian approach and the Iranian policy and edict is that it's against Islam to have a nuclear arsenal. So the standstill is ongoing, but what are the conditions? What is really the United States strategy vis-a-vis Iran? Is it the 12 points stated by Pompeo, or it is the 1 point about the nuclear issue stated by Trump? So there is a lot of confusion, and then you throw in Bolton here, and then you have more confusion regarding how to deal with Iran from the American perspective, and leaving their allies puzzled really about what is the end game of the Americans here.
Let's see then what Hassan Ahmadin has to say in Tehran, bring you into the conversation. Maybe not so much the reaction that we've heard from the Iranian officials, but what you think about how they've interpreted this. As Abdullah was saying, the 12 points versus the 1 point, the slight backing down from the US, the aggression from Saudi Arabia.
Of course, I think the Iranian reading of this, all of this, saber rattling on the part of the United States, is that they don't have a coherent, consistent policy. They only want, you know, to push, to maximize the pressure on Iran to see afterwards what will come up. I mean, there are, of course, Iran hawks in Washington who are advocating, you know, war or a military attack on Iran, but in general, there is no consistency, there is no coherence in there. With regards to Saudi Arabia and the summits, the emergency summits, there's nothing emergent about them from what I hear in Tehran. It's basically what the Saudis want to call emergent. Actually, it's, you know, it's part of the maximum pressure. Whenever the escalation decreases in the region, there is de-escalation in the region on the part of the United States and Iran. Saudis try to, you know, feed the fire and put some fuel on it. And I think this policy is part of it is, you know, bringing back these the maximum pressure on Iran, and part of it is to push back against Iran's diplomatic outreach in the region. You know, Iran's contact with its neighbors, the Gulfis, Pakistan, Iraq, trying to, you know, de-escalate the situation in the region has a lot to do with what Saudi Arabia did last night.
So bottom line then, Hassan,
the Saudis are looking at Trump as an opportunity.
will Iran be worried? Or how worried will Iran be? Or in the end, does Iran, you know, regardless of who signed a communique and who didn't, do they know who their friends are? They know who they can trust. They'll carry on as they were.
Of course. I mean, Saudi Arabia basically divided the region into two camps. It doesn't, you know, basically going there and sitting and listening to what King Salman has to say doesn't mean that you agree with him. Even the closest alliance that Saudi Arabia had during the